The bell above the diner door jingled softly at 7:15 p.m., a sound that usually meant nothing to Jake Miller but tonight made his heart skip. He sat in the corner booth, a chipped coffee mug in hand, pretending to read the menu even though he already knew every item by heart. Across from him, Lily was hunched over a paper placemat, her tongue poking out as she carefully colored a purple dinosaur. She had insisted it was a stegosaurus, her favorite. Jake's coffee had gone cold 10 minutes ago, but he held on to it anyway, needing something to do with his hands. He wasn't supposed to be nervous. This was just dinner. Only it wasn't. Lily had somehow convinced the waitress to help her set up a surprise, a blind date. Jake had tried to protest, but his 7-year-old daughter's hopeful grin had broken him faster than any argument could. The door chimed again, and Jake looked up. The woman who entered wasn't what he expected. Emma Brooks stood there for a moment, scanning the room like someone who'd just stepped into another world. She wore a soft gray sweater, jeans, and a hesitant smile that didn't feel forced. When her eyes met his, she noticed Lily first, then him. And instead of turning away, she walked over. She didn't start with small talk or awkward pleasantries. Instead, she knelt beside Lily and said softly that it was the best purple dinosaur she had ever seen. Lily beamed. "Purple is the best color," she declared proudly, "because it's brave and happy at the same time." Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt the tightness in his chest loosen just a bit. They talked over burgers and milkshakes. Lily, as usual, did most of the talking. She told Emma about her school science project, about how her dad worked in a tall glass building and could make windows so clean that birds sometimes flew into them. Jake flushed at that part, but Emma only laughed softly and said that sounded like a superpower. She didn't look at him the way people usually did when they heard he was a janitor. There was no pity, no awkward silence, just kindness. When she asked about his job, she sounded genuinely curious, as if cleaning skyscraper windows was the most fascinating thing in the world. By the time the plates were cleared, Lily had chocolate on her cheek. Jake was actually smiling, and Emma looked more relaxed than when she'd first walked in. The diner was quieter now, the hum of conversation fading into the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Jake found himself wanting to keep talking, to know where Emma came from, and what made her laugh like that. But before he could ask, Lily yawned wide enough to make them both chuckle. Later, when they stepped out into the cool night, the air smelled like rain. Emma waved goodbye, her breath visible in the faint light of the street lamp. Lily leaned against her dad's side, sleepy but still smiling. As they crossed the parking lot, she murmured softly that Emma's smile was real, not like the pretend ones on TV. Jake stopped for a moment, the words sinking in deeper than she could have known. He looked back toward the diner, but Emma was already gone. The streetlight flickered, and for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared to feel since his wife passed. Hope. A fragile, unexpected hope that maybe life wasn't done surprising him yet. The elevator glided upward in near silence, a smooth ascent that carried Emma Brooks far from the warm chatter of the diner below. When the doors opened, the world changed. The penthouse on the top floor of Silverline Tower was all glass, marble, and shadows. The city stretched endlessly beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows, a galaxy of lights flickering in the dark. Her father was waiting by the window, hands clasped behind his back, posture sharp as the skyline. Victor Brooks didn't look at her when he spoke. "You're late," he said flatly. Emma dropped her bag on the counter, trying to hide the faint tremor in her voice. The diner was busy. She wanted to explain more, but his tone made it pointless. He finally turned, the light from the city glinting off his cufflinks. "I hope the distraction of your little job hasn't made you forget why you're there. Adler's been covering his tracks for months. I need evidence, not excuses." She nodded. though her stomach twisted. Pretending to be a barista in the coffee shop on the 55th floor had sounded almost exciting at first, like stepping out of her father's shadow. But after meeting Jake and Lily, the mission suddenly felt tainted. She could still see the little girl's bright eyes, the purple crayon marks on her fingers, the quiet pride in Jake's voice when he spoke about cleaning the tower. They lived simple lives, but there had been warmth there, something her father's glass palace would never have. Victor moved closer, his expression carved from ice. "Remember, Emma, our name is everything. If Adler is stealing from this company, he's stealing from you. From me. From everything I built. You will do what is necessary." The words hung heavy in the air. She forced herself to nod again. When he left the room, she leaned against the counter, her reflection staring back at her from the polished surface. Her father believed she had his steel, but inside she felt something breaking. Across the city, the quiet hum of the Silver Line Tower at night was Jake Miller's world. It was 10:45 p.m., though he thought of it as 11:15, the part of the night when everything seemed suspended. The offices on the 58th floor were empty, lit only by the faint glow of computer monitors in sleep mode. He pushed his cart down the hallway, the wheels squeaking in rhythm with his footsteps. The sound used to bother him, but tonight it felt like company. He had finished most of his rounds when he noticed a few paper strips scattered near the executive shredder in Graham Adler's office. Normally, he would have tossed them without thinking, but one strip caught his eye. The letters were jagged, but he could make out a few clear words. Cayman. Vertex Holdings. He frowned. It didn't sound like any vendor he knew. Something about it didn't fit. Adler's office was immaculate. Nothing out of place. Nothing left to chance. Jake hesitated, then slipped the small fragment into his pocket. Probably nothing, he told himself. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that it mattered. Later, during his short break, he stood by the window, the whole city glittering beneath him. From this high up, everything looked calm, perfect. But he knew better. He'd cleaned enough glass to understand that even the brightest surface could hide a stain you couldn't see until the light hit just right. Up above, in the penthouse, Emma stood at her own window, looking down at the same skyline. Her reflection merged with the lights, her face half hidden in shadow. She thought of Jake again, of his steady hands and quiet decency. Two people in the same tower, breathing the same air, separated by a world built on secrets. Neither of them knew it yet. But their lives were already entangled. The night outside was still, the city below humming softly, as if holding its breath for what was coming. The park was quiet in the late afternoon light, the kind that turned everything gold. Jake sat on a wooden bench near the pond, his hands resting on his knees. He checked his watch. 6:15 p.m., though in his head it was just after dinner, the time of day when the world slowed down. He wasn't sure why he was nervous. Maybe because this time wasn't an accident. He and Emma had planned this. She had texted him 2 nights ago, a simple message asking if he wanted to grab a coffee sometime. He had said yes before thinking, and now, here he was, waiting, hoping he didn't look as out of place as he felt. Emma arrived a few minutes later, her hair pulled back loosely, wearing a soft blue sweater that matched the evening sky. She waved, and the tension in his chest eased a little. She apologized for being late, said traffic was a nightmare. He smiled and told her it was fine, that he'd been enjoying the quiet. They started walking along the path, their conversation small and easy at first, circling around weather, books, the ducks floating on the water. Then it deepened. Jake found himself talking about things he rarely said aloud. He told her about his wife, how they had met at a college baseball game, how she used to laugh even when the jokes weren't funny. He said she'd been gone 5 years now, taken by an illness that moved too fast to fight. The words came slow, heavy but steady. He explained how every day since then had been about keeping things together for Lily. It was work, school, sleep, repeat. No surprises, no risks. He said he didn't mind. But even as he said it, he realized how much he had missed talking to someone like this. Emma listened, her eyes soft. She told him she knew what it was like to live a life that didn't feel like her own. She didn't tell him about the penthouse or the private driver or the endless expectations that came with being Victor Brooks's daughter. Instead, she said her job made her feel invisible sometimes, like she was just going through the motions. She spoke about how hard it was to be surrounded by people but still feel alone. He didn't know she was telling the truth in a way that hurt. They stopped near the old fountain, the one with the cracked marble base. A street musician was playing guitar nearby, the notes drifting through the air. Jake looked at her and said it felt strange, talking about things like this with someone he barely knew. She smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes strangers listen better than friends." The way she said it made his heart catch. The sun slipped lower, and the park lights blinked on one by one. They walked back to the parking lot slowly, not ready for the evening to end. When they reached her car, there was a moment of quiet, that in-between space where everything felt possible. She looked up at him, and he saw something in her eyes he couldn't name. He leaned in, just enough to give her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, soft at first, then deeper. The kind of kiss that said more than words could. It was gentle, real, and full of everything they weren't saying. For Emma, the warmth of it was almost unbearable. She wanted to stay there forever, but in the back of her mind, she could already hear her father's voice, reminding her that emotions were weaknesses, that this man was part of her assignment. The thought hit her like ice, and when they pulled apart, her smile trembled. He didn't notice. He only looked at her with that quiet admiration she wasn't sure she deserved. Later that night, in another part of the city, a man named Jennings stood near a food truck at a crowded street fair. His son tugged at his hand, asking for cotton candy, but his eyes were fixed on something else. Across the street, under the glow of carnival lights, he saw Jake Miller sitting on the grass beside a woman holding a giant stuffed unicorn. They looked happy. Too happy. He lifted his phone and snapped a photo. The image was clear, crisp, damning. By 8:30 p.m., that photo was on Graham Adler's desk. Adler studied it. A slow grin spreading across his face. A janitor and a mystery woman with no record, no background, nothing. Perfect, he thought. Every good story needs a scapegoat. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Victor Brooks was less amused. Emma stood before him, her coat still on, her heart still racing from the kiss. He held a file in his hand, one that contained surveillance stills from her coffee shop job. "You're seeing a maintenance worker," he said quietly, more disbelief than anger in his voice. "You do understand what that looks like?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer, his tone colder. "You are not like them. If you keep this up, you'll lose everything you've been given." Emma met his gaze, her hands shaking at her sides. For the first time, she didn't nod. She didn't apologize. She just whispered that maybe she didn't want everything he'd given her. Then she walked past him, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the empty hall. Behind her, Victor watched in silence, realizing too late that something inside his daughter had changed. She wasn't following his plan anymore. She was following her heart, even if it destroyed her. The coffee machines hummed softly in the quiet of the Silver Line Tower Cafe. It was 8:40 p.m., though to Emma Brooks it felt much later. The floor-to-ceiling windows on the 55th floor reflected her faint silhouette as she wiped down the counter for the 5th time that hour. Rain streaked the glass outside, thin trails of silver against the dark skyline. The building, usually alive with voices and footsteps, had gone still. She could hear the distant buzz of the elevator cables, the low hum of the city below. She told herself she belonged here, that this was part of her mission, but she still felt like an imposter wearing someone else's skin. Every day she served coffee to employees who didn't know her name. Every night she went home carrying secrets she could never say out loud. Her investigation into Graham Adler had gone slower than her father wanted. He wanted evidence, proof that Adler had been siphoning money through fake subsidiaries. But Emma's thoughts drifted constantly to Jake, the man who had no idea that the woman he trusted was playing a dangerous game in the same building he cleaned. Since that night in the park, she hadn't been able to forget the way he looked at her, as if she was someone worth believing in. The guilt was a steady ache she couldn't shake. Jake, meanwhile, moved through the empty hallways of the upper floors, the smell of polish and rainwater following him. It was 10:50 p.m. when he reached Adler's office, his mop bucket rolling beside him. He noticed a sheet of paper half crumpled under the edge of a desk. His first instinct was to throw it away, but something about it made him pause. He picked it up and saw a series of numbers and words scribbled across the top. Cayman, Vertex Holdings, the same words he had found weeks ago in the shredder bin. He stared at the page, his pulse quickening. It couldn't be a coincidence. For a long moment, he stood there, torn between ignoring it and doing something. Finally, he folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope, writing a short note to the company's CEO, Victor Brooks. He left it in the secure outgoing box, the kind that went straight to the executive suite. It felt like the right thing to do, even if he couldn't explain why. At 11:20 p.m., the storm outside intensified. Thunder rumbled faintly as Emma sat in the break room, scrolling through her phone. A message appeared from one of the IT staffers she'd bribed for information. Adler had discovered a system breach. Someone had accessed restricted data, and security was sweeping the building to find the source. Her blood ran cold. There was only one person she could think of who might have stumbled into that danger without realizing it. Jake. She grabbed her coat and ran, her shoes echoing against the marble floors. The elevators were locked for inspection, so she took the service stairs, climbing 3 flights before bursting onto the 58th floor. The lights were dim, casting long shadows over the hall. She spotted him near the window, standing with his cleaning cart. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, confused but smiling faintly at first, then frowning when he saw the fear on her face. Before she could reach him, the elevator at the far end of the corridor opened. Victor Brooks stepped out, flanked by 2 security guards. The rain behind the windows flashed with lightning, and for a heartbeat, everything froze. Emma's breath caught. Her father's eyes moved from her to Jake, piecing it all together faster than she could explain. He spoke her name sharply, a sound that sliced through the silence. Jake looked between them, realization dawning in his eyes. His voice was quiet, but unsteady. He said her last name softly, almost as a question. Brooks. She reached for him, desperate to explain, but the words died before they left her lips. He took a step back, his face pale, his expression hollow. The air between them felt heavy, full of betrayal and things unsaid. Victor's tone was low, controlled, deadly calm. What is going on here? Emma tried to speak, to tell him it wasn't what it looked like. but Jake's voice cut through hers. He looked straight at Victor, then back at her. The anger wasn't loud. It was quieter than she could bear. He said only 2 words, the ones that would echo in her head long after he was gone. "I'm nobody." He walked past them, each step slow, deliberate, the sound of his boots on the marble floor louder than the storm outside. Emma reached out but didn't follow. She stood frozen as the elevator closed behind him. Her father turned away, his voice cold and final, cut off contact with him immediately. She didn't move. The hall was empty now, save for the flickering reflections on the glass. The rain had turned to a downpour, blurring the city lights into streaks of white and gold. Emma pressed her palm to the window, searching the streets far below for any sign of him. She saw only shadows, and then nothing at all. The weight of her choices settled over her like the storm itself. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry. The rain outside answered, steady and endless, washing away the last warmth left in the night. The call came early, just after 8:30 a.m. Jake Miller was told to report to the executive floor. No explanation, just an order. He arrived wearing his work uniform, still dusted with glass cleaner and paint flecks, looking out of place among the suits and marble. The receptionist didn't meet his eyes. She only pointed toward the double doors of the boardroom. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with judgment before a word was spoken. At the head of the table sat Victor Brooks, silent and unreadable. To his right, Graham Adler reclined in his chair, his smile small and smug. The rest of the executives whispered among themselves, pretending not to stare at Jake. Someone slid a folder across the table. Adler spoke first, his voice smooth. He explained that security logs showed unauthorized data transfers from the cleaning department's network login. He said the suspect had been caught on video near restricted files. He said the man had stolen company information and tried to sell it. His tone was calm, confident, rehearsed. Jake listened. Expression blank. He didn't interrupt. When Adler paused, he simply asked why he would risk everything for something that made no sense. Adler shrugged, almost amused. People get desperate. Victor raised a hand, stopping the exchange. He turned to Adler, asking for the evidence. Adler passed the folder over. Screenshots, printed logs, staged photos. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Victor flipped through the pages slowly. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then Victor leaned back, eyes narrowing. He reached into his own briefcase and pulled out 2 worn papers. He laid them flat on the table. One was the torn scrap Jake had sent weeks ago, with the words Cayman and Vertex Holdings. The other was a data log copy, recovered from the internal system before it was wiped. Victor looked at Adler. "Explain this." Adler hesitated. Just a beat too long. Victor ordered the security technician to pull up the access records. They showed 2 identical entries, one real, one forged. The timestamps were seconds apart. He asked for the surveillance footage from the night of the breach. The technician clicked. The screen lit up, and there it was. Adler himself, entering the restricted office, deleting files, inserting a drive into the system. The room went still. Adler froze, color draining from his face. Victor's voice was low, but every word landed like a hammer. "You were right about one thing. Adler, someone did steal from me." He stood, his gaze sharp. "It was you." 2 guards moved forward. Adler stammered, tried to argue, but Victor didn't look at him again. The doors closed behind them, leaving silence in their wake. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Victor turned to Jake. "You were the only one who tried to tell the truth." You have more integrity than my entire board combined." Jake didn't know what to say. For weeks he had been treated like a ghost. Now the most powerful man in the building was looking at him with something close to respect. It felt unreal. He swallowed hard and nodded, still not trusting his voice. Victor told someone to bring Emma in. She entered quietly, her face pale. She stopped when she saw Jake, tears welling instantly. He didn't move toward her, but his expression softened. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everything was said in that moment of silence. The weight of betrayal, the ache of forgiveness, the fragile start of something that might heal with time. Victor watched them both, then turned back to the window. The city stretched before him, gleaming and endless. His reflection looked older than he remembered. He spoke more to himself than to anyone else. This company needs men like him, people who do the right thing even when no one's watching. Outside, the clouds began to part, sunlight spilling across the skyline. Jake stood quietly, his shoulders finally straight, no longer bent under shame. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Emma's hand brushed against his as they walked out together. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was enough. Behind them, Victor remained at the window, his face calm, the storm that had hung over them all finally breaking into light. The afternoon light was soft when Emma pulled up outside the small garage on the edge of town. It was 4:20 p.m., the kind of hour when the sun made everything look a little forgiving. Jake was standing by the open door, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. The air smelled faintly of oil and fresh paint. He didn't look surprised to see her, just quiet. He leaned against the doorframe, waiting. She walked toward him slowly, her heels clicking against the concrete. She looked different now, simpler. No makeup, her hair tied back like she had left the world of marble floors and boardrooms behind. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of a car engine somewhere down the street filled the silence. Then Emma's voice broke, low and steady. She told him everything, how it had started with a lie, how she'd been sent to find evidence, not love, how every word after that first meeting had been real, even when she wished it wasn't. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She only wanted him to know the truth before she left. Jake's eyes stayed on the ground. His jaw tightened. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not cruel. Finally, he said quietly that he still remembered the night under the streetlight, how she smiled like she was seeing him for who he really was. He said he had tried to forget it, but his heart didn't listen. When he looked at her again, the anger was gone. Only something tired and tender remained. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and said maybe some things were worth breaking for. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down, and when she opened them again, he was smiling faintly. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. 1 year later, the backyard behind Jake's small house had been transformed. The grass was freshly cut, white chairs lined the rows, and strings of lights hung between the trees. It was just after 5:30 p.m. The ceremony was small, friends from work, a few neighbors, and Victor Brooks sitting quietly in the front row. Lily wore a yellow dress, her hair in braids, holding a basket of flowers she kept tossing too soon. She laughed every time petals fell on the wrong guests. Emma walked down the path, barefoot, holding her father's arm. Victor's steps were slower now, but his eyes were warm. When he reached Jake, he placed her hand into his and nodded, a silent gesture that said more than any speech. The vows were simple. Jake cleared his throat, looked at Emma, and said that once he had told a billionaire he was nobody. But today, standing there with her. He realized he had everything. Emma's eyes filled again as she whispered back, that to her. He had never been nobody. The words hung in the evening air, soft and certain. When they kissed, Lily clapped so loudly the guests laughed. She ran up and threw her arms around them both, squealing that she wanted her turn too. The photographer caught it, the three of them framed in sunlight, the wind tugging gently at Emma's veil. Victor watched from his seat, a faint smile tracing his face, his gaze fixed on his daughter's happiness, as if it was something he had waited his whole life to see. The light faded. The guests lingered. Laughter mingled with the sound of cicadas in the grass. Jake held Emma's hand as they looked out across the yard. The world felt still, not perfect, but peaceful. Every storm, every lie, every scar had led here. And in that quiet, golden hour, they both knew they were home.